Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Symposium Data Consciousness, Reframing Blackness in Contemporary Print. I am Adriana Farmiga. I am the Dean in the School of Art, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all as we gather here at the Cooper Union. The Cooper Union is thrilled to be able to host today's conversation with this remarkable group of artists and scholars, including our very own William B. Alongo, professor, colleague, friend, and alum from 1999. To hold this conversation at Cooper is especially fitting. Since 1859, the Cooper Union has been a center of civic discourse, a place where artists, thinkers, and leaders come together to exchange ideas and to foster a just and thriving world. We are proud to continue that tradition today, and we are especially grateful to join with Print Center of New York and our panelists whose work is shaping urgent conversations on race, identity, data, and technology. Today's program embodies the spirit of Cooper Union, and we're delighted to see you all here today. So on behalf of the Cooper Union School of Art, thank you for joining us. And with that, I am delighted to turn it over to Judy Hecker, Executive Director of the Print Center of New York. Thank you.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Adriana. We are thrilled and really grateful to be able to partner with you on this day. It's an extra special day for Print Center New York. We are precisely 25 years from our birth on September 20th, the year 2000. We opened our very first exhibition. That's right. We opened our very first exhibition in our very first space in Chelsea 25 years ago, and we couldn't be more excited and honored to mark that anniversary today with all of you and with the remarkable exhibition, Data Consciousness, Reframing Blackness in Contemporary Print, on view at the Print Center at 535 West 24th in both the Jordan Schnitzer Gallery and the Leslie and Johanna Garfield Gallery. If you haven't been, please go. If you have been, go again and again. Data consciousness embodies everything that we strive to be at Print Center to New York, a thoughtful and gutsy platform for bold, independent curators like Tiffany Barber. Groundbreaking, that's right, Tiffany. A platform for groundbreaking print projects like the portfolio by William Villalongo and Shraddha Ramani titled Printing Black America. Let's hear it for that. And the powerful and nuanced cross-disciplinary works by Tahir Hemphill, Julia Mallory, Silas Monroe, and Camille Jana Rashid, all of those artists who are with us today. After 3 years of planning this project, it's really thrilling to see it come to fruition. So please be sure to go to 24th. There is a lot of deep looking, reading, listening, and reflecting to be done. So come again and again. I have a few thank yous. I'll try to be quick. We're indebted to all of the artists and the scholars and the thinkers who today will expand on the exhibition's themes. Will and Shraddha, thank you for your partnership, a true partnership in this endeavor. Our trustee, Mark Thomas Gibson, for being an early champion of this entire project. Tiffany Barber, who I mentioned, who came on with such gusto. Thank you for your imaginative and expansive approach to curating, to thinking, to writing. And I've got to acknowledge the 6 print publishers who saw the significance and the importance of this project early on and committed to collaborating with Will and Shraddha. Graphic Studio in Tampa, High Point Editions in Minneapolis, Island Press in St. Louis, Maloney Printing Company in Portland, Oregon, Paulson Fontaine Press in Berkeley, and Powerhouse Arts in Brooklyn. I have been in this field for a few decades, and I have never, ever seen printers, publishers, and artists rally around an idea and a project like this. It's really something unprecedented. We'll be in conversation with all of those printers on Zoom on October 20th, so I hope you'll tune in to hear from them. Finally, an enormous shout out to the committed team at Print Center New York, Tiffany Nesbitt, who got this project fully funded for us and then funded again when our federal grants were taken away earlier this year. Our Jen Bradovich and Alex Santana for their brilliant collaboration with all the curators and artists on the exhibition, the catalog, the symposium, all of our upcoming programs, which you can read about in the brochure that you've picked up. We're really grateful to the individuals and the funders whose commitment makes this project possible. Leadership support is provided by the Charina Endowment Fund and the Terra Foundation for American Art. Additional significant contributions are provided by the Wyeth Foundation for American Art and the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Art Bridges is generously supporting this symposium and all of our public programming and the national tour of Data Consciousness, which will begin in 2027. Woo. Print Center New York is always grateful to the leadership support of our Board of Trustees, as well as the Jordan Schnitzer Foundation and the Garfield Family Foundation. I also want to take a moment to single out the Agnes Gunn Foundation and the one and only Aggie for her early and catalytic support of this project and of so much more. The art world, the world indeed, lost a profound and authentic and endearing advocate this past Thursday. A champion of women artists, artists of color, a champion of justice. This project is indebted to her and so many in the past, the present, and the future to come. So we really have her legacy to thank. There are many, many other important people to thank, half of you out there. Buy our catalog, read the acknowledgments. You should all pre-order this spectacular book designed by Polymode. There is so much to absorb, to read, and to see in it. And you can do that on our website, printcenternewyork.org/shop. So order it. I have a feeling it's going to sell out, so you definitely want to order it. At a time when history is being erased and art practices are being censored, places like Print Center New York exist to counter that. But we can't do our part unless we have support from people like you, too. Whether it's $5, $50, say $500, every amount keeps our free programming going. We don't charge admission, we don't charge tickets, but we do ask, as you are able to, become a member, make a contribution. Every amount goes a long way with us. So go to our website, at a minimum, sign up on our mailing list, printcenternewyork.org/support/join. It's all there. We have so much going on over the next couple of months and really look forward to welcoming you to 24th Street again and again. Thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Joshua Myers. Our first session today is on the legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I need to do anything here? Testing. Oh, sounds good. I kind of want to sing. Wow. I think by way of introduction, I think each of us should say a little bit about who we are and our relationships to W.E.B. Du Bois. And it is Du Bois, not Dubois. We're not mispronouncing his name. Mine is easy. My name is Joshua Myers. I teach at Howard University. And I made the mistake of writing about Du Bois, and now people think I'm a Du Bois scholar.
Okay, can you hear me? Oops. Can you hear me? Now? Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony Starks. And what I knew about Du Bois really started in 2018. I came here in New York to a meetup because I'm interested in things like data visualizations. And I saw a presentation of his work from the 1900 Paris Exposition. Was blown away. My mind expanded. And immediately I thought, because I'm a developer and also a designer, I'm thinking, how can I recreate these? And at the time I'd been working on tools to do that. And throughout 2019, I embarked upon a phase to actually recreate them with the tools. And in doing so, I wanted to put myself in the seat, if you will, of the people who were doing that work, 120 years prior to that. And just doing that and learning about it just really brought me into the world of Du Bois. The world of thinking about intention, thinking about not just doing pretty pictures, but doing things to have a message. Thinking about the message that Du Bois wanted to tell the world in 1900. Along the way, I've met a lot of very interesting people who are in the audience now, who helped me throughout this journey. But it's all about thinking about all the work that he has done and how prescient he was going forward. So my idea is to bring that world and to bring that work to the current situation that we're in now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Jackson, and by day I'm an urban sociologist at Rutgers, and I'll say by night, not really. I'm a cultural producer who likes to do a lot of scholar activism work. I first learned about Du Bois when I was back at Temple University in 2007. And, being from Philly, we all know the very race and class geography of the city, living in one neighborhood and then going literally 3 blocks. And the neighborhood is completely different. And so, at that time, even just me driving from my home through North Philadelphia to Temple, which is now Templetown, right? I started to engage with Du Bois's work, particularly with, of course, Philadelphia Negro. And I was gifted the ability to be able to work on a community arts project with Black North Philly teenagers called The Souls of Young Folk. And so, yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity where we created a multimedia production of poetry, music, and African dance. And so very early on, that was when I was able to really take a Du Boisian lens in thinking about questions of our bodies, of neighborhoods, of family relationships, of spirituality and politics. And yeah, from there, I just kept going with it. And yeah, happy to talk about it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charisse Burden-Stelly. I'm a Black Studies scholar and a knowledge worker. I'm quite sort of impressed to be on stage with so many multi-potentialites because I am not talented in that way. I'm just an academic, but I honestly can't remember when I came to Du Bois. It feels like he was, always part of like my intellectual development and journey. I also, like Josh, made the mistake of writing a biography of Du Bois, co-writing one, and then now am considered something of a Du Bois scholar, but I just consider Du Bois a thought partner, an interlocutor, a mentor, somebody who is sort of an endless well of knowledge, somebody who models what it means to be an organizer, activist, a guerrilla intellectual, to use the terminology of Walter Rodney, and somebody who really was committed to using every tool in his toolkit to labor on behalf of Black people. And so, yeah, that is my sort of specialization, if there is one, is the late Du Bois, so post 1930 Du Bois. As an anti-imperialist, I'm very interested in his writings and deep thinking about socialism and communism, anti-imperialism, and a world beyond capitalism and colonial exploitation.
Cool. So where do we go from here? There's some interesting markers like 1900 Paris. Let's throw that out there. 125 years ago. But he's also in London in 1900 doing something else, right? First Pan-African Conference. Then, 25 years after that, so 100 years ago, he's here in New York. Did he ever come through the Cooper Union? Anybody know? Of course, right? He was in every part of the city in many respects, but of course, 100 years ago, somewhat at the origin point, if you will, of what some people like to call the New Negro movement. And Tiffany allowed me to read her piece for the forthcoming catalog. And one of the things that stuck out is she mentioned Du Bois as the criteria of Negro art and the debate happening among the New Negro ideologues and the artists about what it is art, how should it be used, what's the function, is it just for beauty, is it for political struggle? Of course, we know in many ways these binaries don't really work, but they're thinking through them because they want to be clear about what they're doing, right? And juxtaposing that moment, 1925, 1926, and the arc of the activism and struggle and political realities besetting African peoples in the world, what the hell good is art? This is rhetorical, but also like we need to sit here and think about it. And I know this is being recorded and the fascists, but also the liberals are watching. And we know that Du Bois was constantly under threat, under surveillance, not just in the so-called phases where he's aligning with the radical Marxist organized left, but also when he's engaged in creating data portraits, right? In fact, we know that in the early 1900s, this was considered frightening, threatening, right? He begins to lose funding for doing things. Just like we are losing, some of us at least, are losing funding from the state now, right? Du Bois loses funding from the philanthropic complex, right? And so I want to throw out just a broad question about what does it mean to be about the work of Du Bois in 2025? What does it mean to truly be about that work?
So for me, one of the things that always struck me about Du Bois is when he's making an argument, he always had the data, and he always used the data to back up his arguments. And again, using the data portraits and things like that are a way to make that data much more accessible. Again, when you're thinking about what happened in Paris in 1900, that's a world stage. And I compare and contrast always that stage to the stage that we have today, right? He didn't have the internet now, but he would have used it probably, I would say, if we'd had it back then. So what it means to me is using the data, telling the stories regardless, and getting them out there using by whatever means necessary. One of the things I forgot to mention is I run something called the Du Bois Challenge, where we challenge the data visualization community to recreate that work and post it on social media, all social media. I find it sort of a revolutionary act to make sure we post on things like X, to make sure that instead of being chased off that, use it and use all of the means that are necessary to do that.
I wanted to answer this question based off where you went with the criteria of Negro art. So when I was in undergrad, applying for graduate school, the first publication that I did was actually on Du Bois and his idea of using art for propaganda. A little different than the way we know the term today. But I combed through The Crisis and other magazines of his, and especially centered around criteria of Negro art. And I was just really struck by his statement, quote, "All art is propaganda." And through analyzing his work, I really realized that art is indeed the radical and aesthetic engagement that we need that pushes our narrative forward. But I also think that it is, kind of culture, and then as we bring in data, especially in the exhibit today, it's also a platform to kind of play with these notions of both like subjectivity and liberation. So that really impacted me. And I think like through his other work, but also through data as well, and as a Pan-Africanist, I think that Du Bois also really puts forth African descended people as epistemic subjects rather than just objects of study, right? He really places African descended people at the center of this narrative. And also, as Charisse mentioned, as being an organizer, Du Bois in sociology really paved the way for public sociology and the way to be able to bridge the university with the community, and kind of gives us a blueprint in a way for being contemporary scholar activists. And really, as he said, not doing armchair sociology, sitting in my office and making all these notions about like what Black people really are, but he really wanted us to engage authentically. I don't mean superficially, I mean authentically in deep-rooted community-based work that gives us a lot of lessons for modern-day planning and modern-day community organizing. And then I say, lastly, I think what's so beautiful about Du Bois, and this is what I try to capture in like my jazz work as well, the whole social emotional life of Black people. I mean, Souls of Black Folk was a beautiful piece of work that was prose and song and essay that really captured the heart of Black life, like not only in urban spaces, but in rural places. So I'll stop there, I can go on and on, but yeah, 10,000 ways he's still impactful.
I think that what it means to sort of be a scholar of Du Bois or to continue on in his legacy means just that. It means to keep going. So Du Bois, as Josh mentioned, Du Bois faced a lot of repression, not only in the era of McCarthyism, but for example, from 1906 to 1907, he, Monroe Work, Richard R. Wright, and others engaged in a study of Lowndes County, Alabama, for the Department of Labor. But because they were looking at land ownership, labor relations between landowners and tenants, political and sexual mores, and other so-called controversial topics, the Labor Bureau first kind of withheld the study, and then they destroyed the only copy. So what did Du Bois do? He wrote Quest for the Silver Fleece, which was a fictionalized version of that story. So he could have stopped and become disillusioned, but he kept going. In 1944, he was a professor at Atlanta University. He was pushed out for a number of reasons, one being, he was retired for old age, but it also had a lot to do with his politics. What did he do? He returned to NAACP. He had left the NAACP in the 1930s because the organization was trying to take too much, sort of micromanage his editorship of The Crisis. So he left and went back into academia. 1948, he's pushed out of the NAACP for a number of reasons, one of which was he had edited a petition to the United Nations called An Appeal to the World. Eleanor Roosevelt, among, talk about liberals, among many other people, felt affronted by this petition that drew attention to the subjection of Black people. They thought that he was embarrassing the United States on the world stage. He was pushed out of the NAACP. What did he do? He joined the Council on African Affairs. The Council on African Affairs collapsed in 1950, because of state repression, because it was red-baited, a number of things happened. What did he do? He founded a peace organization in 1951 called the Peace Information Center. Then he got indicted by the US government as an agent of a foreign power. He was acquitted. And then he married his second wife and longtime mistress. I also like Du Bois, side note, because he is a messy boots. But his beef with Garvey is one of my favorite historical beefs. But anyway, so there's a lot going on there. But so he was indicted, he was acquitted. He kept going. Ultimately, his passport was suspended in the process of this. He ultimately ended up going to Ghana, right, where he passed away in 1963. But he tried, what people don't also know is he wanted to come back, but what happened was the Supreme Court upheld aspects of the McCarran Act, which would have continued his surveillance and sort of, anyway, I studied state repression. So, but the moral of the story is, one, Du Bois was Du Bois because he was always in organizations and collectives, from the American Negro Academy to the Niagara Movement, the NAACP, the Council on African Affairs, and on and on. He is not a singular individual. We often treat him as such, but he is Du Bois because of so many other people, networks, and connections. And secondly, he kept going. Like, we continue, and so we like to think that our moment, for example, is of singular repression or surveillance, but this has always happened. And Du Bois was subjected to this over the span of his life, and he kept on working on behalf of Black people, oppressed people subjected to colonial imperial domination. And so I think that if we are to be in the spirit of Du Bois, we also have that historical task to keep going.
You want to add? Okay. So, thank you. I think you have to. If you're going to start with the 1900 data portions, you have to follow the full evolution, I think. And I remember when these data portraits became a thing. I won't say the word discovered, but I remember when it became a thing about 8-9 years ago, and people were fascinated by the capacity of Black scholars to produce such striking visual work at the time. I work at Howard University, so nothing about the Negro fascinates me anymore. But one thing about that, it wasn't, like Charisse said, individual genius. He was working with students. He had a sociological laboratory, meaning this was a whole systemic attempt to really restart, undo, I think, too, the project of American sociology. And then he turns to something else, right? Then he turns to other things. And this evolution, I think, is extremely important, because for Du Bois, I would hazard to guess it wasn't so much the data as much as it was the consciousness that drove him. What does it mean to produce truth, right? And so this question, I want you all to ruminate on the relationship between data, truth, consciousness, and the political implications of really thinking with how Du Bois was doing a bit more than drawing some pictures here or producing some facts. In fact, he was a philosopher of science if you really read him, right? And so data, science, what did I say? Consciousness, truth, and the political connections that Du Bois made.
So I can just start here. I don't again, like this sort of area of Du Bois's life I'm most familiar with is the later part. But I think these earlier moments of his life are really important, and his insistence upon not just data but rigorous study of Black people, because he understood the what had paraded as science especially as it related to Black people, was prejudice, bias, and whatever the fuck white people said about Black people was supposed to be taken as truth, right? And so he insisted on data not because of some, as today, now our turn to STEM, there's this idea that STEM is like the be-all, end-all of knowledge. He did not hold that perspective, but he knew that having truthful or veracious understanding of Black people required data. And not just data collected by people who had skin in the game to tell the truth about Black people. And so science itself, as Josh is saying, needed to be put under scrutiny. What counted as knowledge production needed to be put under scrutiny. What counted as sources, who counted as subjects and objects of study needed to be subjected to rigorous scrutiny. So one of the things, so later on when he was advocating for, I think they're called the land grant studies, right? There's a 100-year study of the Negro that he advocated to be performed by social scientists and others at HBCUs, can be traced back to his early, some of his early writings in the 1890s, when he's insisting upon the fact, right, that the Negro problem is a white projection. And that if we're going to have a real study of what is actually just race relations, what is actually to be done about Black people, then we have to again, use all the tools in our toolkit to be able to have a complete picture. I think the other thing too is that, so one of the most famous lines from Souls of Black Folk, published in 1903, is, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. By the time it was published in Souls, he had already established this idea as early, I want to say, as 1895 was the first paper, and then in 1900 at the Pan-African Conference. And the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line is a scientific statement. It's a philosophical statement. It's a sociological statement, right? It's a Black studies statement. And I think that really drove that problem, which is a problem of imperialism, a problem of enslavement, a problem of Reconstruction, a problem of colonialism, and so on, that this was really the foundation of his methodology, right, to resolve this question, which is not reducible to science. It requires art, it requires cultural production, it requires propaganda. Because to finish the quote that was mentioned by Christina, what he said was, all art is propaganda and ever must be. I do not care a damn for any art that is not used for propaganda. So science and art are mutually constitutive. All are part of presenting a truthful and honest and loving understanding of Black people. And I think that that's also the crux of, a Du Boisian methodology, is like, you have to love Black people to tell the truth about them. And not love in the sort of arrow sense, but love is like radical responsibility. He was responsible to Black people. And I think that really drove how it is that he studied them.
Yeah, I guess I could just riff off that as well. I love the statement that one of you made about Du Bois, you said that, putting science under scrutiny and under the kind of magnifying glass. Absolutely. So, at the turn of the 20th century, Du Bois was really on the warrior front lines of debunking biological notions of race, first and foremost, and reiterating the social construction of race. And at this time, I think he was still trying to be within the realms of sociology, like before 1900. But there was a lot going on during that time period that I think also helps us to understand it. You had Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise out, which was, obviously Noah's speech that was, determined to not really threaten the basic interests of the white elite. I know everybody has a lot of opinions about Booker T. Washington, so we'll just stay there. But then 2 years later, of course, we had Plessy versus Ferguson, right? And so in this sense, Du Bois is calling attention to like the hypocrisy, right, of a Black man sitting in a white-only rail car, and normalizing that as both a subjugated racial and class position. And then, of course, he's offered this opportunity to create this exhibit of the American Negro, right? And Du Bois was like really troubled at first. He was like, what do I do? Like, how do I mean, you probably know more than me. But he was like, how do I present the life of the American Negro truthfully, right? And, you know, he was like, a photo wouldn't necessarily unpack all that, but he was like, maps can. Maps around land ownership, maps around housing, right? And mortality, right? That is the truth, right? And so he really wanted to use data to really nuance Black life, and data visualizations was basically the ways that he showed that Blacks were systematically held back, right? You know, I think, like I said, most importantly, at that time also, he could have just stopped and tried to understand and discuss the Black experience through data, but he then went internal, right? And he then was wanting to show these both emotional, spiritual, and psychological dimensions of Black life and what it was like diasporically being both like a colonial and economic subject. And so I just love that he was able to capture both. And we try to do that today, but it's just like Du Bois did that so seamlessly, right? So I feel like we're just all stilled, right? Trying to find out how to use his work and how to kind of show both truth and beauty.
So going back on the history and the context, I always like to put my mind in what was going on around that time. 5 years before that, here in Brooklyn, there was a zoo, if you will, human zoo, where they got Black people to cosplay being slaves. And you could go to the fair and you can watch them do that. In 1895, we've mentioned Plessy versus Ferguson coming up in 1896. Then the Philadelphia Negro, his work. Then, you know, in 1898, the Wilmington overthrow. All right? All of these things are contemporary. This is what's happening. And he's pushing back against that notion that Black people are less than. So he's coming to Paris and saying, this is who we are. This is how far we have come in 35 years since emancipation. And he's telling that to the world. And one more thing, lynchings peaked in Georgia around that time as well. And everybody talks about, and people know about, how he was affected by the lynching of Sam Hose directly, seeing the artifacts, if you will, of that heinous act. So this puts me out, again, in my work, I wanted to put myself in their shoes while they were actually building those things. And in doing that, I had to go back and see, what was it like back then? And these are the things contemporaneously that was happening, and that I think, I'm gonna say, probably pushed him to say, I gotta tell this to everybody. This is who we are, this is how far we've come.
Awesome. The colors that he used. What were some of the dominant colors? Somebody just red, blue, yellow, black. A lot of primary colors, right? All of those colors actually have deeply spiritual meaning for African people. And whether or not Du Bois recognized it and or was aware, he likely was, showing that to Black people who may not have had the scientific training would have resonated, right? And so the color blue, for instance, having a connection to many different spiritual formations, and red, yellow, black, and white together, representing moments of creation and renewal. George Washington Carver over at Tuskegee, right, doing a lot with the color blue as well. He's more than just, you know, someone who's dealing with peanuts, right? He actually invented a new color, Egyptian blue, right? And so Black people, in other words, linked beauty to spiritual transformation, or what we saw as beauty, or what we might see as art as spiritual transformation. And so something inside me says that that's intentional, because as he's working with these students at Atlanta University, he's also engaging in spiritual processes with them too. There's a book called Prayers for Dark People, right? And Du Bois is still agnostic. He's still not thinking about this through a lens of doctrine or dogma, but he's thinking about this through the lens of there's other forces out there, right? The forces that make the seasons change. He loved that moment, like the moment we're in right now. He would just watch the seasons change, right? And then he would connect that to the spiritual journeys of our people, the souls of black folk, right? The sorrow songs. And then when you get to his most important book, Black Reconstruction in America, 35 years later, that then becomes the frame for understanding the confidence that these same people had to continue that resistance in the wake of the beginnings of the Civil War and through, which is the only moment where there's actually a possibility of democracy in this country. You've never had nothing approaching that since. And it was because of the spiritual lives of these peoples. And so for me, consciousness has to evoke that question, right? How did people who believe in things that you could not see navigate a world of terror? Art. Art is connected to that question. And so, Tiffany, one of the things that I liked that you did was you made the science or the quantitative data, you made it art, or you articulated it as art, which is the thing that it's evoking obviously the things that we want to enumerate and quantify, but it's also hitting somebody right in the spiritual core, connecting the cosmos to the things that we want to change in our reality right now. That's what the Africans who saw that data likely also saw, right? And when you quickly thumb through the portraits, right, it connects, for me, to that larger tradition of reducing colors to reality and then having that reality transform. That being said, my next question is not, the question is not, are artists still doing that? Because they are. The question is, do we have the chops to recognize it?
I think we do, because as humans, as you were alluding to, we all can have that emotional connection to something that we see and something that we can walk up to and look at and touch. So that's still there. And it's up, again, to the artist to be able to pull that out, color, form, whatever it happens to be.
Can I add something? So I was thinking this, but I didn't say it. The disruption of technology into the art-making process is what I'm thinking about. And the disruption of technology into the way that we arrange our own consciousness. And of course, I'm talking about artificial intelligence, right? You go over the Strand, how many books have AI covers, right? In this particular moment. And how our artists who are doing the work that we say that we are supposed to be doing, or should be doing, or might be doing, having their lives interrupted by, I was gonna say our laziness, but our relationship to capital that forces us into this box where the ease of AI, the ease of having something decided for us, the ease of having something created for us has disrupted our ability to even conceive of beauty.
In my view, the issue with AI is we're still trying to figure out what it looks like and how to use it appropriately. And I think at this point it has its own aesthetic. It's terrible in my view, but I think we as human beings will have that ability to determine what is real and what is not. And again, we got to look at AI as just what it is. It's, some people call it a stochastic parrot. It's not going to do anything other than what you just pour into it. And we've got to be able to recognize that aesthetic, whether it's good or bad, and we have to be able to say, use the tool for what it can do, and leave the rest.
Y'all have any thoughts? I know I didn't prepare y'all for that one.
No, this is a wild question. It's a wild question, but a good one. I will say stuff about AI. Y'all can have that discussion. But I will say, thinking about Du Bois and, for me as being someone, quote, trained as a sociologist in academia in this ivory tower. No, to answer your question originally, I don't think that we are trained to be able to engage, I'll just use the word engage with like artwork. And I think that, but what I feel I've learned from Du Bois is that Du Bois teaches me about the form and what you all said when you were presenting those data maps and how you can really play with time and space. And I was really taken aback about, the maps and how big the circles were, and it related to like demography and population size. So I think that there is a potential to be able to take Du Bois's work and use and play with form and where we are. And I'll even go as far to make this global. I think he did that with Pan-Africanism too. I think that if we look at the form of, struggle, right? He really wanted that to be around the solidarity of the working class globally. And he really was about African independence and the ability to be able to work collectively. And that's form, like that's artistic form to me. And I feel like Du Bois gives us a space to be able to play with these ideas. Yeah, I don't know, I'll just stop there. I don't know, you wanna add to that?
I want to say that it's not just or only about becoming critics and or consumers of the art, because that's its own prison. But understanding that art is collective, communal, it's being open to what it can do for us, right? So I'm not asking, my friend to write a review of the film that we just experienced, but I want that film to do something for them, right? And I do want them to recognize what it's doing for them. I guess it's just a feeling then, right? It's not something that exists only in our rational minds. And so the challenge, I think, is when everybody has a hot take about whatever the hot artist or the hot film is, we go to that criticism bag and we forget that art is really beyond, or experiencing art is really beyond my ability to find some hidden message that I think my friend didn't see. But the other part about this is that because the art world is so engrossed in the industry that decides what is good, decides what is bad, using algorithms, especially in Hollywood, the community is not the arbiter anymore, right? And so everybody has to have a take on Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. We don't get to decide whether or not Kendrick Lamar is the artist, though, or who. It's like these things are done for us, which kind of feeds into the uneasiness that I have about the way that we experience art. And I think the same thing goes to how we might invite people into an exhibition space, right? And so what kind of copy has to be on the walls that serve more as an invitation than an explanation? That serve more as an opening rather than rational closure. This is what this art is, right? Who are you to tell us? And so that's why I think I would like to promote a more expansive, more experimental, more adventurous reading of what's happening with these data portraits. So I guess that's kind of what I meant. And I think, Christina, your point is well taken, that it does have us grapple with the question of form, right? And genre, right? So, yeah.
I don't know anything about art. I really don't. And it's so sad because my mom's an artist. And we go to a lot of art museums. I just look for the Black people in art. Seriously, like I went to the Prado in Madrid once, and I just literally counted all of the Black people that were in these paintings. I'm an African American studies scholar. But what I will, as my colleagues were talking, I thought about trust and alienation. I don't think that we trust ourselves collectively or individually, which leads to a reliance on things like artificial intelligence. We're not willing to make mistakes, or we don't see the sort of value or beauty, right? Or the sort of the spiritual component of making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And so more and more we rely on algorithms for taste, for access, for understanding, because we're alienated from ourselves, from each other. And that is a function of, I think, of capitalism and the different types of social relations that come from that. And then that, alienation leads to profound distrust, right? There's also a way that we don't necessarily trust ourselves, our interpretations, we don't trust each other. And then, more and more with misinformation and disinformation, we can't even trust like what we see, right? What we hear. Which leads to this question of time. So Christina, you mentioned time. And that I always get the sense from Du Bois that he just had a different orientation to time. There was always enough time and not enough time at the same time, that sort of like aporia, which is why he was able to do so much and did so much, right? Because there's so much to be done, but then there's also a possibility to do it. And I do think that there's something about our current temporality that is like hyperspeed, whether it's getting something overnight from Amazon or having to do more and more and more in less time to just be able to survive, that also disallows a particular type of engagement that Josh is talking about with art. We turn to explanation as opposed to invitation because we don't have time. Like, we don't have time to figure it out. We don't have time to sit with things. We don't have time to rethink. And something about Du Bois is that he rethought a lot. He made a lot of mistakes in public, like outwardly, and willingly so. And so people will talk about contradictions or hypocrisy in Du Bois' thought. I just think he was like, what the fuck are we gonna do? How do we figure this shit out? And that means making mistakes. That means going back on what you said. It means taking a piece of writing and revising it, right? So remixing yourself, re-engaging with things. And I think, again, that's a particular orientation to time that that is always here, but that we don't necessarily take seriously because we're looking for the answer. Like, we want to be right, or we want to be properly oriented to the algorithm so that we can blow up, for example, so that, we can matter in a way that is profoundly alienated from like what that actually means, from something collective, from something that is not commodified. So anyway, those are the thoughts that I had about that question.
So when I think about, again, just the act of creation and all of that, a lot of work that I do, I don't really know who actually sees it, but it doesn't matter to me because I'm doing it for myself. And I'm doing it to put it out there. I think of a quote from Gates, who said, "Are you willing to work in the absence of light?" Meaning that doing the work, even though nobody is actually seeing it, but the act of actually doing it and putting it out in the world is enough.
Well, I can keep talking, but I think we might want to do audience, right? Yes. While you all are thinking, given the time that we are in, or given how we might unthink the time that we are in, what is one thing from Du Bois's legacy that they're going to have to take from your cold, dead hands? You'll never rewrite this part of Du Bois for me.
I can start. I think, I love Black Reconstruction. I think it's a wonderful text. I think Du Bois is masterpiece is In Battle for Peace. I love In Battle for Peace. I think that and something that is featured in Battle for Peace is commentary from Shirley Graham Du Bois, who is not only his second wife, but she's like the keeper of his legacy. So much of what we have and what we know about Du Bois is because of his loved ones, like Shirley Graham Du Bois, Herbert Aptheker, and others. But like the way that he narrates that 1950s moment and the way and why he stands for peace, not pacifism, but peace, and what peace actually means, which is the sort of resolution of the antagonisms of imperialism, colonialism, war, and capitalism. I think that's a beautiful text that like many people don't even know about it. But that is like, and an offshoot of that, he had a tiny pamphlet that came out as a precursor to that was called I Take My Stand for Peace, that also talked about like his indictment and his different sort of peace program. At the time, he also ran for the Senate. Anyway, so you'll have to claw that book from my cold dead hands because, yeah, I have an original, like a first edition of that, but I think that it's a beautiful work for a number of reasons.
It's a tough question. I was going back and forth. I was like, is it Souls? Is it The Comet? But I think I'm going to land at The Crisis. The Crisis was a really, among other journals at that time, Crisis was a really beautiful publication that was out of the NAACP, that he was the editor of, which, you know, obviously there's lots of turmoil of his relationship with NAACP as well, but it was like the premier Black community newspaper. It had essays of data and science, of course, maps, poetry, housing in Black Chicago and Black Philadelphia, comparing, contrasting ads, like Madam C.J. Walker, like selling her products, like art's work, Jacob Lawrence from Atlantic City. I mean, there was just so much there, and I feel like we're hard-pressed to find like a kind of community publication that does that similar work of bringing knowledge to and highlighting knowledge made from African descended people, and I didn't even go in theater, but I mean he was also trying to highlight businesses and theater and art worlds that are for and by Black people. So really the original FUBU, honestly.
And also putting his people on, his boo, Jessie Fawcett. Apparently they had an affair that stemmed from him publishing her in The Crisis. Du Bois was messy, but, you know, I also think, you know, anyway. Yeah.
So for me, again, the legacy is the data portraits, given the work that I do and the things that I want to do. However, the other legacy is think about intention and also being bold. When you look at the things that were created for that exhibition, they hadn't been seen before, as you were alluding to. And being bold and, you know, again, this is sort of my lesson that I always tell people around technology is never, ever, ever take the defaults that come with your tools, all right? Start with that blank page. Use your own creativity for doing that. So intention and boldness, for me, are the legacies from Du Bois.
All right, audience. There's one up here.
Hey, I'll try and project my voice.
He's coming with the mic.
Oh. Hi, thank you all so much. My question had to do more so if you could speak more about, you know, you mentioned Du Bois as an individual figure that's remembered in history as one person, but so much of the work that he did you know, working despite surveillance and repression was about being in community with other people and collaboration, which is challenging and can be messy. And so if you could just speak more to, you know, who else was kind of like in the orbit, who else might deserve recognition for Du Bois's legacy. Yeah, Thank you.
Well, that might take a long time.
Some highlights, maybe.
I'm going to go with another individual, Irene Diggs. Yeah. Irene Diggs. Do I want to say anything, or do I want to let y'all Google her or not? No, actually, Irene Diggs, I mean, she was involved in many of the major projects at the end of Du Bois' scholarly career. And I'm kind of interested in the books that didn't come out, too. So he was working on a sociology textbook with her near the end of his life that was going to really do what sociologists thought he had already done. Or sociologists of today thought he had already done. But he wanted to codify it. He wanted to put it down, right? This is how you go about this, practice. She was, in her own scholarly career, an anthropologist, known for her work on Brazil. She spent time, she was in Baltimore. Du Bois had a house in Baltimore. And so there's a lot of collaboration there. Morgan State University, many things I would say. But I think that she needs more attention, Irene Diggs.
So there's this place in New York, 409 Edgecombe Avenue. At a particular historical moment, specifically the 1940s and 1950s, so many Black, kind of like petty bourgeois, but like radicals were there. So like William Alpheus Hunton, Louise Thompson Patterson, Du Bois. But there was it was such a vibrant space that so much was being created, like some of the drafts of the We Charge Genocide petition, the formation of the Sojourners for Truth and Justice. Like there was a lot that was happening in 409 Edgecombe Avenue as a building, so it was in Sugar Hill. And so I think that space, right, that's a collective space that is important to the creation of so much of what is important, especially to like Black radical scholarship after World War II. So the Council on African Affairs is an organization that I mentioned. Somebody named William Alpheus Hunton. If we're talking about individuals, I love William Alpheus Hunton. So he actually in 1961 left the United States. He went to Ghana, met Du Bois to work on the Encyclopedia Africana. He first went to Guinea, then he met Du Bois in Ghana. But he's like a really, really, really amazing person. There's a biography of him called Alpheus Hunton, The Unsung Valiant, that was written by his wife, Dorothy Hunton, that was republished by international publishers, I'm gonna say in 2021, 2022. He's somebody that's really important in that Du Bois really respected and admired. There is a periodical called Freedom Ways that you should really know. That's really important. Du Bois's second wife, Shirley Graham Du Bois, was instrumental in its founding. It's a continuation of Paul Robeson's Freedom newspaper. But there's a special issue on William Alpheus Hunton, also on Du Bois. And so many important people like John Henry Clark were part of Freedom Ways. So there's just all of these collective things that Du Bois was directly involved in, or that sort of people that he helped to mentor and that also supported and helped him were part of. So like Josh said, we can go on and on, but those are just some off the top of my head.
I was just gonna slip in and add an organization, Du Bois's Social Clubs of America. These were groups that were made on college campuses that he helped to shepherd, of really catalyzing students in an anti-imperialist movement, and really seeing the threads between the Vietnam War and just the disenfranchisement of African descendant people worldwide. And of course that got him on the list, and I think probably led to him leaving the country. But that was listed as like a Communist Front organization, but there was some really deep community organizing that went on those circles, and that connected the university with the surrounding communities.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I just want to extend first appreciation for this panel and the conversation and a number of things that you all have been illuminating this afternoon. I actually sort of have somewhat of a follow-up to the previous question, and it also ties to something that was mentioned earlier that also started to think about. And I was curious about the extent to which Du Bois had any conversations, any relationships with Aimé Césaire. And asked this for a few different reasons. One, as another anti-colonial thinker, also founder of the Negritude movement, or Negrescence movement in France, mentor to Fanon, but also as someone who was also thinking about this dualism of science, and for him it was the poetics, right? So the thing that made me think about this, especially earlier, was the ways in which you were talking about, the ways in which Du Bois was thinking about the mutual constitution between science and art. For Césaire, he really was going after he was calling the lie to the Enlightenment in relation to science, and really pointing to the ways in which the poetics, in fact, point even more toward, is even closer to what would be understood as nature or truth, if you will. And so I was curious if Du Bois and Césaire ever had any conversations, if there's any record of that, and if so, even what was that relationship like? Or, I'll even push this, even a more speculative question, even if not, what might that conversation have been like?
I am not aware of any direct correspondence or connections, but certainly if you do the intellectual history of negritude, there's absolutely an interaction with the larger question of what was happening in Harlem with the New Negro movement, Harlem and beyond, of course. Brent Hayes Edwards, the scholar, writes about the significance of Paris at the same time. And so, yeah, I think the person who might be the key to this is Alain Job, who was the editor of President's Africain in Paris. I would start there to uncover any connections here. I would also probably start with a figure like Mercer Cook. Is Mercer I think the son of Will Marion Cook, but Mercer was Howard Professor of French, and he was involved in a lot of the efforts to translate a lot of these works for radical English-speaking audiences in North America, and so that might be a connection. But if you read Poetry and Knowledge, one of my favorite essays by Aimé Césaire, is absolutely connected to several things that Du Bois wrote, namely Sociology Hesitant in 1905. And I would read those two essays together. I would also, and I've done this, but I also think of the role that poetry plays in Black Reconstruction. And so it's interesting, like every chapter begins with narrative and ends with poetry. In between is the data that he's marshaling, the historical data that he's marshaling. And so to make it land, Du Bois turns to poetry. Just like in Souls of Black Folk, he turned to music to make it land, right? And so I could say more, but poets, we like poetry. And nobody likes poetry, right? Anyway.
Multimedia artist.
I have a question. I really appreciate, Charisse, you saying Du Bois was messy. And I was just curious, like, if y'all had any tea on Du Bois. It's interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I ran across a new publishing of Essex Hempel's selected poems. And there's an introduction in the book by Robert F. Reed Farr, and he is quoting Du Bois talking about Claude McKay's 1928 novel, Home to Harlem. And I guess according to this essay, Du Bois's words about after reading that text, he said, "The work nauseates me, and after the dirtiest parts of filth, I feel distinctly like taking a bath." So I wonder if any of you have any tea.
Like
or-
Jesse
or
Fawcett
wait.
tea,
Right.
Georgia Douglas Johnson tea,
Right. Marcus Garvey tea, Shirley Graham Du Bois tea.
County Cullen tea.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, Yolande Du Bois.
Exactly.
What
Actually, my
Yeah.
favorite story of Du Bois is difficulty. And actually, my students, so we read autobiography every spring at Howard, and for the first time, I guess this is newer Gen Z students. There's like we don't like this. Why? Because they couldn't get past the personal. I'm like, y'all, he's struggling. He's a recovering Victorian, right? And so that's why he didn't really dig like what was happening in Harlem. Harlem was too free, too bohemian, they do anything up here. And Du Bois is like, hey y'all, what y'all kind of getting distracted with all this, And then he's doing that on the side. That's the T. So David Levering Lewis handles a lot of that. Sometimes it gets to
Who
be
is that?
David Levering Lewis, his biographer. Sometimes it gets to be a little soap opera-y. But my favorite story about his difficulty is the story that John Hope Franklin told about the first time he met him. And I'm gonna just paraphrase it. They were in some research space. Du Bois had a very set schedule when he was doing a project. I'm gonna wake up at 7. I'm gonna do my correspondence. I'm gonna do this, and then every day by 10 p.m. I'm in bed. He learned that at Fisk, right? And so I guess I'm not gonna say rest is resistance, but anyway, Du Bois had a very set agenda. And so John Hope Franklin sees him in the archive, and he's like, oh my God, my hero, Du Bois. And he goes up to him, and he said, Dr. Du Bois, my name is John Hope Franklin. And he keeps reading. I also went to Fisk University like you. And he keeps reading. I'm also working on a historical project like you. And he's looking down. He's not even acknowledging him. The only time that he actually looked up was when John Hope Franklin said, I'm also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. And Du Bois says, well, how do you do, sir? Mm-hmm. And then he kept reading. Like, that kind of poor character, if you will, was about the work, though. Like, get out of my way. If you ain't got nothing to offer me in this particular moment, I don't got no use for you because I got to get this work done right now. And so sometimes his irascibility or his irritability looks like, oh, he's just messy. And yes, and other times it's, I have a very set thing that I want to do right now. And that's sometimes how you produce 30-something odd books and 3,000-something articles, right? Like, leave me alone.
I could see that. Never mind. Okay.
I'm like that too.
Right. I was like, that really resonated with you, which is why you're prolific and brilliant. But anyways, so Du Bois, there's a man named Hubert Harrison that, long story short, he drags Du Bois for the Closed Ranks article. Hubert Harrison was brilliant in his own right. A scholar, Brian Quoba, just came out with a biography of him. There's also a two-part biography by Jeff Perry about Hubert Harrison. But basically, so then Du Bois is like, so he calls himself like Dr. Hubert Harrison. He talks about how he was from the Danish West Indies. And so Du Bois goes on a little bit of a quest like, do we really got a PhD? Kind of like we do with Umar Johnson, like, where'd he get it from? Did he really? So that's messy. One of my favorite pieces of, one of my favorite things I ever found in the archive was a letter from Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois to Shirley Graham Du Bois in 1950. When he's talking about, they're about to get married, and he's basically like, I'm broke. I can't take care of you. This has to be an equal marriage. This is not a marriage for parasites, is something that he says. But he says, like, we need to share and share alike. We have to go 50-50 on this. There's a whole debate about going 50-50 now. But basically what he was saying, and this is not necessarily tea, but it was like, he's like, I was already in a marriage, a traditional patriarchal marriage. I'm not interested in that. This needs to be a marriage of equals. And I know you want somebody to take care of you. It ain't gonna be me because I ain't got it, basically, right? And so to me, that's just such an interesting letter. She didn't respond. I have not been able to find her response to that letter in his papers or her papers, but like that to me was just very interesting and indicative of where he was, because he's like in his 80s at that point. he don't have that much money, and he's just like, girl, like I'm not him, but we could do this together though. So I just felt that's one of my favorite things, and I write about it in some of the articles that I write. Another piece of tea, which is actually a corrective, is that people thought that Du Bois was like intimately involved in getting Marcus Garvey deported. He was not. He was not. He had turned over some articles from the crisis to the State Department after Garvey had already been indicted, and so he's pissed off about this. Like, yeah, I called him a dark-skinned monkey, whatever, but yeah. Granted, Garvey called him like a mulatto, all kind of stuff, right? But he did not have anything to do with that deportation. In fact, it was a bunch of socialists. It was people in his own party. It was people who were involved with the Black Star Line, or excuse me, in his own organization that were involved. And so, like, Du Bois gets a lot of blame and flack for being part of the Garvey Must Go. He was not part of that campaign. So that's like some corrective tea. Anyway, there's lots of, but what I want to say about historical tea, it's not that we be nosy, but that these were human beings. They had real lives, and we too often, especially in this time, we like to discard people or quote unquote cancel people or say they're not worthy of study because of whatever they were doing in their own historical moment. So like Martin Luther King got a lot too. But the point is, like, we are all human beings, and we all have a responsibility to transform this world. And what we do in our private lives is one thing. We should try to live our ethics and values for sure. But at the end of the day, these were human beings, and their contributions still matter, irrespective of what was happening on the side. And perhaps, in fact, because of them, because this is the human experience after all.
I think the Shirley thing was in advance over how he chose Nina, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nina, first of all, Nina was his student.
Oop. And there's a lot of those.
Right? And this is not uncommon. Ralph Johnson Bunch, right, married his student.
He was only 24, to be fair.
Right? But first, it was a student, but not only that, their parents were basically like, all right, here's their eligible bachelor. And so every student had to make him dinner and invite him over to the house. And Du Bois, like, and this is the family story. So Du Bois Williams tells this story. And so he was like, all right, all these women have made me dinner. I've been entertained at their houses. And he makes a list. One side is, all right, these are all the beautiful women. And he writes the ones that are beautiful to him. And then the other side are here are the ones that can actually cook. And only one person was on both lists. And that's how he chose Nina Gomer Du Bois. But they did come to love each other, kinda, right? And so there's a beautiful story about their first or second Christmas together, maybe the first Christmas together, and you can tell that there's a tenderness to it, like they grew into each other, which tells us about evolution, right? We should probably also like deal with Talented Tim too, but that's another.
Well, can I chime? I was just going to say my tea that I'd love to hear what y'all would say, which I feel was kind of started the seed in his beef with Booker T. Washington, but that Du Bois was elitist. I mean, at least in the beginning. I mean, a lot of people felt that, with Booker T. Washington, he was born a slave. Du Bois came from Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He was, the only black kid in his class, and he was deeply intellectual. And, they were like, Du Bois, you're out of touch, right? You're not in, which I don't think was true because he was also in the South, like studying like black life down there, but him being elitist, and then, they said the same thing about the crisis in many ways. Some, like, Garveyites were, saying they had a little beef. They said when they came in the NAACP office, it was filled with white people in the front, and they were like, I had to go through all the sea of white people to get to Du Bois and the black. So, I mean, there was a thought, but I'd love to hear what y'all think.
Well, I don't use elitist when I talk about it. I use he was a Victorian. I mean, he was shaped in a different environment geographically. Like, New England is different. I had to realize that once I got to New England. Like, this is just different. And it wasn't a question of quote-unquote socioeconomic class because Du Bois didn't have nothing. They didn't have nothing. The Burkharts were not rich. They were not middle class either. And so it was him being shaped in an environment where this is how you carry yourself, and then he gets to a place where that's not how you carry yourself. It's like, oh, I'm still going to wear my shoes like this because I like this, right? And then, of course, his intellectual journey through Europe and Harvard and other places like that, and then coming back to a place like a Wilberforce, where he's like, all right, we're learning the cutting edge sciences up there, and then y'all want me to teach Latin and Greek and pray. I was like, Dr. Du Bois will not pray. That's what he said when they asked him to pray, and he almost got fired, right? To them, or to people who are like there in that world, it's like, oh, he thinks he's better than us. And it's like, perhaps, but also he just came from a different place. So I see the end sign, so I'm gonna stop.
Just briefly, oh yeah, I have a sympathetic understanding of the talented 10th as responsibility. I think that there's a way that, though, but to me, part of what Du Bois is saying, not all, but part of what he's saying is that those who have the relative access, privilege, and leisure to get higher education, you have a responsibility to everybody else. So and he even says, like, you shouldn't be tricking off buying all this bullshit. Like, he agreed with E. Franklin Frazier in terms of how it is a waste to be a consumerist and all these things, but as an educated person, you have a responsibility to Black people. There's a side to talented 10 that I think that as people who have PhDs and who are educated or who are in the managerial class, we have completely forsaken that responsibility. And so I think that there's at least a sympathetic reading in that.
Which he called in 1948. Mm-hmm. He called it out.
In front of the Boulay.
I thought y'all was going to do something in service to your people, but I realized y'all only care about buying nice cars. And then they left him at the hall after he gave that speech. He was
going to take our cars then.
He was sitting in the cold on the bench, just like, okay, I guess that's all right. So yeah, he called it out. I mean, I have to really like spend time with my students on this because talented 10 is usually the only thing they've heard. And so the fact that he really revises, pushes back against himself. In fact, at Howard in 1930, he says, yeah, all y'all care about is liquor, fur, and extravaganza. Something is off here. And so, yeah, I mean, he was very much a critic of Black elite circles.
And Black capitalism, too.
We have time for one last quick question. Great.
Hi, first, thank you so much. I have a question about method, because we were talking about data visualization and things like this. And I guess my question is to all of you, any of you who care to try to answer this question about method, is what do you do? Like, what are some tools that you feel are particularly useful or that kind of resonate with you? Have anything changed in your own practice and kind of as you feel, as you try to figure out how to be responsible to this moment and to your students? Thank you.
So I'll answer that around tools. Tools don't really matter. Use whatever you're comfortable with. I'm sort of in the spirit of Du Bois, an elitist. I don't like the tools that are commercially available, so I wrote my own. I'm not expecting anybody else to do that. But that's what works for me. But for example, when we do the Du Bois Challenge, we explicitly tell people, use whatever you want. And my advice would be, don't get so worried about the tools, but use what works best for you. And think about the thing that you're trying to make. And if the tool doesn't work to give you what you want, be open to moving to something else.
I'll say, for me, Du Bois really charted the path for being an ethnographer. He was really, he saw the importance of spending time in relationship in communities and really getting to know folks, but also very beautifully not conflating our Black identities, right? So, the way he was looking when he was in Philadelphia and going around working with his team, he's wearing his top hat and, his he was looking, but he was being himself because of where he was from. And he was reflective about that. And I'm highlighting that because I think a lot of ethnographies aren't, no shade, On the Run, Alice Goffman, sorry, but, Venkatesh's book, Gang Leader for a Day. Like, Du Bois is really upfront about being clear about what we now look at as community-based research, and really being in communities and organizing with folks as a way to learn about Black life, and also not being limited by that as well, right? So then he brings in, humanistic thought and poetry and music at the same time as a way of also ascertaining truth and knowledge, which ethnography doesn't really do-ish, a little bit, right? But I think Du Bois helped to pave the way for that.
I think something that I take away from Du Bois's methodology is surrounding myself with the best people. And the best does not mean people with PhDs, generally. Some do, some don't. But people, there's this saying like iron sharpens iron, but he had an uncanny ability to point out really, really talented people that might be overlooked because they were women or because they were educated at a particular place. But he was profoundly adept at convening intellectual communities in many different types of capacities. And so I think that I try to do that as well through writing groups and through sharing work and getting feedback and offering feedback and making myself available for others. So I really do think like having people, surrounding yourself with people who are invested in sort of a form of knowledge production that is for people, and that is to the end of not like bloviating or like knowledge for knowledge's sake, as it were, but that is meaningful to collective people. And so to me, that's a really important step in methodology, is like a collective piece that has to do with with knowledge sharing.
Yeah, I like that a lot in terms of, again, using social media and that kind of thing. Being able to be inspired and also to use things that other people have put out into the world is really, really important. My work would not be what it is if it weren't for the examples that other people have done that I've been able to leverage and being inspired by. And therefore it inspires me, whatever I'm doing, to put it out there if people can find some value for it. So yeah, use what people have and be inspired by it.
So I'm in a phase where it's like 95% music, right? And the other 5% is poetry. And thinking about what that means for us. And so that's primarily where I like the fact that you use practice, because that's where my practice is. It's less in the realm of research methodology and more in the realm of what does this sound mean for me and for us. And I think that's connected to Du Bois, even though I'm not directly making the connection. Du Bois was working on a music book too. And so there's an outline of his study of Black music in the archive. His first fiance was a musician as well, someone who he met in Cambridge while he was at Harvard, and so it was always with him too. So that's where I am. Almost 95% of the time is thinking with music. I'm about to go to a concert right after this. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here and for your questions. I'm Tiffany Barber. I curated the exhibition and the symposium, so thank you again for being with us. We're going to take a 10-minute hospitality break, but I also just want to give a shout out again to the amazing panelist and moderator, who also, Josh became a panelist, so I love that. So good. Everything I dreamed and more, but yes, we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.